I'm Claire Summers, the Deputy Coordinator of the Critical Theory Certificate, and I'd like to welcome all of you to the final lecture of the Visualizing Theory Conference, and I hope you've all enjoyed the conference over the past 2 days. Last night we had Ann Carson, who gave a wonderful lecture, and tonight we're very excited to have Kaja Silverman here to speak. I've been hoping to have Kaja Silverman here for many years, so when we decided that the conference would have the theme of visualizing theory, I knew that it would be the perfect opportunity to finally have her come. The Visualizing Theory Conference is the 7th annual Critical Theory Conference, and first and foremost, I would like to thank my co-organizers, Jin Chang, Joseph Goodale, and Zachary Lloyd for all of their hard work on this event. Please, give them a round of applause. They've been doing a wonderful job. On their behalf, I would also like to thank our conference sponsors, without whom this conference would not be possible: the Center for the Humanities, the Advanced Research Collaborative, the Office of Public Programming, who is doing a diligent job here, Jimmy, as we speak, the Doctoral Students Council, Mise en Scène, and Constance Old in memory of her brother Lloyd. I would also like to take a moment to thank the faculty members who chaired panels over these past 2 days. Many of you I see are here tonight, so I'd like to thank you all for being part of this conference. Tonight's lecture is being given as part of the Critical Theory Today lecture series, and past speakers in this series have included Harold Bloom, Slavoj Žižek, Stephen Greenblatt, Homi Bhabha, Jonathan Culler, Frederick Jameson, and now we add Kaja Silverman. So thank you for being here. How's it coming? I'll keep talking, it's okay. The Critical Theory Today lecture series actually began in support of the Critical Theory Certificate, which I co-created with Andre Asiman. Andre Asiman has been the coordinator of the certificate since the program's inception, and this program would not have been possible without his support and stewardship through these years. After 4 years of proposing this program, the certificate was approved in August of 2014. And I know I gave these numbers last night, but they bear repeating. As of today, we have 200 students currently enrolled from 20 different departments. This makes us the largest certificate program here at the Graduate Center. But a program like this, it's not about numbers or governance or titles or even the budget. The Critical Theory Certificate has only been successful because of the people who are involved, people who are dedicated and who value the program. So I would like to take a moment tonight to thank all of you. Whether you've been with us since we first started creating this program 8 years ago, and I see here many of you remember those early days, or whether you're just joining us for the first time tonight, I would like to thank all of you for supporting critical theory, and that's something we don't take for granted. It is the community that's been formed by all of you that has allowed this program to flourish. So are we set? Okay, so, yay. So at this moment, I would like to welcome to our community here at the Graduate Center, Kaja Silverman. She is the Catherine and Keith L. Sachs Professor of Art History at the University of Pennsylvania and the author of 9 books, including The Acoustic Mirror, Flesh of My Flesh, and of course her seminal work, The Subject of Semiotics, which was actually my first encounter with Kaja Silverman. She is the recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship and currently the holder of a Mellon Distinguished Achievement Award. Her most recent book, The Miracle of Analogy, is the first installment of her History of Photography series, a 3-volume history of photography. The second volume, which is called The Three-Personed Picture, is actually going to be published this year, so please keep an eye out for that. Her presentation tonight is called Before the Picture, so please join me in welcoming to the stage Kaja Silverman.
Can we, this is kind of blinding. Sorry, everybody. This is, I'm in the middle of writing this book. It's actually, these delays are entirely my fault. And now everything seems to be completely out of order. So I'm in the middle of writing a book that has turned into an enormously, overweeningly ambitious book. I wrote this book called World Spectators, during which Eve Meltzer was my TA many years ago, and I have a chapter called The Language of Things at the end, in which I started dealing with what I call objective intelligence and intentionality, objective in objects. And I always had thought that my next book, the book that I would write immediately after that, would be photography, and it would follow from that, but history intervened, and I ended up having a different kind of itinerary, but somehow in the process of working on this particular book, that strand has come back, along with a whole lot of other things that have to do with pictures and the conditions under which we could expand our capacity for care and why our capacity is so limited, and come to the kind of astonishing discovery that the picture and the individual were born at the same moment, and am now beginning to think that the picture is almost the holder of our renounced visibility, and that there is some mirroring of a very astonishing sort going on. So this is a story about the 15th century, the great metaphysical transfer, as I call it, the emergence of the individual, and then these strange, mysterious pictorial challenges to the individual, this emergence of another kind of agency. So here we go. Like the story that I recount in Miracle of Analogy, the one that I recount in this volume is embedded in a larger narrative that has a prominent place in the history of being. This narrative began in the 15th century at the dawn of modern metaphysics. Man had just swept away the gods, elevated mind to the position of the supreme value, and proclaimed himself the absolute master. Because this coup was so recent, it lacked legitimacy, so he tried to authorize it by demonstrating that he too could create ex nihilo, since the aesthetic domain was the only one in which such a claim was even remotely plausible. That was where he tendered it. He did so by assuming two new personae and devising a different kind of picture. The personae, both of which are still with us, were the theological author and the self-fashioning individual. The theological author entered the world through Alberti's account of perspective, and the self-fashioning individual through Pico della Mirandola's treatise on the dignity of man, a book as emblematic of the Quattrocento as meditations and discourse are, Descartes, that is, of the 17th century. Since this was a brave new world, as Shakespeare would say, and its self-proclaimed gods had not yet been tested, there were no limits on the powers that they were prepared to impute to themselves via the theological author and the self-fashioning individual. The theological author was, as Leonardo puts it, the master of all kinds of persons and things, whose look constituted the, quote, indivisible point at which all of the pyramids, all the rays of light converge, and as Della Mirandola puts it, the self-fashioning individual, the free and extraordinary shaper of himself, who could assume any form he wished. the topicality of this should be evident. I mean, I feel that we have now reached the limit towards which we have been going all the time with this fatal embrace of the individual, and you know who I'm talking about, right? And it was not only the painter whose powers were described in pictorial terms, it was also that of the deity who served as the template for the theological author and the self-fashioning individual. Della Mirandola, Leonardo. Yes, so I have a reading of this also. It has nothing to do with Genesis 1 through 4, and I'm truly amazed that no one has ever noted all of the peculiarities of this, but this is kicking God out of the picture. This is what I call the one and only, which is the self-fashioning individual. Della Mirandola, Leonardo, Dürer, and Michelangelo all model these figures on the Old Testament God, and all gravitate to the same two passages, in both of which these qualities are described in pictorial terms. Genesis 1 through 4, and the other, actually, very surprisingly, is in Deuteronomy and Exodus, and it has to do, of course, with monotheism. So in Genesis 1 through 4, as seen now through the eyes of 15th century man, Yahweh creates the world over the course of 6 days, and at the end of each day, he looks at what he has created and finds it good. On the last day, he creates man in his own image. He thus occupies all three positions within what I call the pictorial trinity: author, beholder, and model or sitter. In the second passage, again now seen from the 15th century point of view, Yahweh is both the only God the Jews are allowed to worship and the only one who is allowed to make images. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Thou shalt not make thee any graven image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, etc., etc. And of course, now God has become, he's no longer a wordsmith, he has become a picture maker. And so this is God in his glory days, and now we're going to be dealing with the waning of the gods and the inadequacy of God anymore to combine all three functions, and that is going to be the definition of an inadequate God. So everything is being redefined in pictorial terms. So in these stories, it's always Eve who's moved over to the side of God because he needs a helpmeet, and Adam has no need for any kind of relationality. So in defense of the dignity of man, Della Mirandola transfers the qualities that Genesis associates with the demiurge to Adam, and vice versa. Della Mirandola's demiurge is the supreme architect of the world, but he becomes melancholic after completing it because it's a masterpiece, and a masterpiece needs a beholder, and he is unable to perform this role. He also seems unwilling or unable to serve as the model for man because there are no humans in his world, and he is also incapable of being alone. So instead of providing Adam with a companion, he attempts to provide one for himself and a beholder for the world by creating Adam. And now that's already pretty good, I think, right? Pretty good. But it gets even better. Since the world is complete, every slot in the great chain of being has already been filled. Since there's no place for man in this hierarchical structure with its fixed and predetermined notion of identity, the demiurge decides to let him live outside the totality to which the rest of creation belongs, to determine his own identity and destiny. And we have a whole page of the sky's the limit. You can be whatever you want to be. You have total and complete agency. And of course, he is allowing Adam to be both a brilliant artist, the artist sitter, and the artist's masterpiece. He also promises man that his wishes will be completely satisfied and that he will be, as I was saying a moment ago, exactly what he wants to be. So this is part of it. And I think Donald Trump was reading this in the first grade. Whatever seat, whatever form, whatever talent you may judge desirable, the same may you have and possess according to your desire and judgment, and it will be the best ever. You, constrained by no limits, may determine your nature for yourself according to your own free will. You may, as the free and extraordinary best ever shaper of yourself, fashion yourself in whatever form you prefer. It will be in your power to degenerate, this is pretty good, into the lower forms of life, which are brutish. Chose that option. Alternately, you shall have in your power, the power in accordance with the judgment of your soul to be reborn into the higher orders, those that are divine. There's no Eve, no prohibition, and no fall in this version of the story, just Adam's continuous ascent to the higher orders. So this was written at the very beginning of modern metaphysics, at the ecstatic moment in which mankind had just exempted itself from the limits to which all other species were subject and was reaching for the stars. Man therefore didn't know that as soon as this species separated itself from the totality to which it had previously belonged, its members would begin differentiating themselves from each other, and they would not be content until they had broken every link. Nor did Della Mirandola know that in order to be the individual he so lovingly describes, man would not only have to be different from everyone else, but utterly identical with himself. But Descartes' meditations and discourse on method speak volumes about the impossibility of these quests. Increasingly, the picture was expected to instantiate what man could not instantiate, to function the way that to be absolutely singular, absolutely self-coincident, to fulfill these two values, singularity and absolute self-coincidence. So to be the one and only one. So the quote from Leonardo about painting: "It cannot be copied like letters where the copy has the same value as the original, nor molded as in sculpture where the cast is equal in merit to the original. It cannot be reproduced indefinitely as is done in the printing of books. It remains peerless in its nobility. Alone does it honor its author, remaining unique and precious." This is a good one. "It never engenders offspring equal to it." And this singleness makes it finer than the sciences which are published everywhere. It's in the view of its proponents for man, by man, and about man. And I think that it would be an accurate definition of a representation. I think that we are about to learn that it isn't, that no picture is ever completely for man, and no photographic picture is ever completely for man or by man. One day, very early in the 16th century, Leonardo glanced at the luminous images streaming through the, have a look at, yes, the one and only, the lordly. I could reach out, I could touch your fingers, but you are a person of such incredible inconsequence that I will simply dismiss you with a slight flicker of my middle finger. And of course, I'm so large that there's really, God is being blown out of the picture. You see the pagan children climbing all over him. Leo Steinberg established the woman as Eve, but we already knew that. And God apparently has become fruitful and multiplied. And Adam is so large that we would have to be in the Starship Enterprise to see the angle of the Earth in that way. So Adam, you can see he is the one and only inhabitant of the earth. So, one day, very early in the 16th century, Leonardo glanced at the luminous images streaming through the aperture of his camera obscura and saw something in them that he had not noticed before, something that prompted him to compare them to a painting. This is surprising, to say the least, because there is nothing in our surviving accounts of the camera obscura prior to this passage to suggest that anyone attributed aesthetic value to its images or even thought of them as images in the contemporary sense of the word. For centuries, the camera obscura has served primarily as a device for safely witnessing a solar eclipse. Its viewers were consequently accustomed to looking through it rather than at it. And although Leonardo had recently begun using the camera obscura to study the eye, he was still treating the camera obscura's images as substitutes. He compared the images to paintings because he saw the qualities in them that the 15th century associated with authorship: aesthetic intelligence, intentionality, and reflexivity. There was, however, no author in sight. These images originated in the bodies of objects rather than the mind of a subject. Every body, quote, fills the surrounding air with infinite images of itself, corresponding to all of the points from which it can be seen, and every image includes within itself an infinite number of other pyramids that intersect and cross each other. It directs these images towards our eyes. They're extraordinarily complex, ontological extensions of the bodies in which they originate, or as he puts it, given off by those bodies. Each conveys the, quote, nature, color, and form of the body whose extension it is. So it's a kind of combination of what Heidegger would call presencing and presentation. And what we are moving towards is some kind of mind-boggling idea that the pictorial is really at the heart of being itself, that we couldn't peel it away, that all the arguments that have been made about images with respect to the world have failed to grasp this really profound nexus. Although this was the first sighting of what I will be calling objective intentionality, intelligence, and reflexivity, it was hardly the last, and it continued to be linked to painting. In the 17th century, Higgins declared all painting to be, quote, dead by comparison with the camera obscura's images, for here is life itself, or something more noble, which may sound as if we're moving away from the aesthetic, but then he says figure, contour, and movement come together naturally therein in a way that is altogether pleasing. In 1704, Harris wrote that, quote, "One sees the colors of all things in their natural paint," again seeming to associate it with the natural, but then adds, "and such an admirable proportion of light and shadow as is impossible to be imitated by art." Count Francesco Algarotti devoted an entire chapter of an essay on painting to the pictures he saw in the camera obscura, and in it he extols the justness of their contours, the exactness of their perspective, and the chiaroscuro, the vivacity and richness of their colors, and the infinite variety of their tints. So, two new photographic pictures appeared in 1839. So I'm sure that most people in the room haven't read Miracle of Analogy, but in it I argue that photography has been with us, has been here as long as we have. It's as old as light itself, and that it's unstoppably developmental, constantly assuming new modalities. So the pinhole camera, the camera obscura, the optical camera obscura, and then photographic cameras that change design so radically over the course of the 19th century. And of course, we've seen so many permutations since then. This is standing for the first picture, I think, rather well. The first of these pictures was the one for which William Henry Fox Talbot was such a brilliant spokesman, and to which I devoted the first volume. Unlike the camera obscura's image dream from which it derived, and which it in many ways resembles, it required a human facilitator, someone to select, measure, and mix the chemicals or food substances that would be used to receive and retain some part of the image stream in a sedimented form, to apply the resulting solution to a sheet of paper or glass and insert it into the camera obscura, and decide where to place the camera obscura, and subsequently perform the actions that would hopefully prevent it from disappearing, although one never knew. It did not, however, have a human author. It was created through an autogenesis, which Talbot sometimes locates at the site of the picture, and sometimes at the site of the picture. In one passage, he says that it makes itself, and at other times he attributes it, the making, the autogenesis, to the, quote, inimitable beauty of the pictures of nature's drawing, which the glass lens of the camera throws upon the paper in its focus. This equivocation was Talbot's way of accounting for one of the most surprising aspects of the picture, which we also saw in Leonardo's perception, the revelation, the day that he saw the painting-like aspects of the camera obscura's images, which is that these images are the bodies that generated these images, both present themselves through them and presence through them, things that we would normally oppose. On June 24th, 1839, a French civil servant named Hippolyte Bayard announced that he too had invented a photographic process and that it predated Talbot's and Daguerre's. It was a paper process like the calotype, but instead of a negative, it generated a direct, unreproducible positive. His interest was aesthetic. He wanted to make pictures with it, and he wanted the signature on them to be his own. He tells a fantastic story, a kind of allegory that his father grew peaches and sent them to neighbors in baskets, and he wanted them to be not just from him, but by him. So he created these little paper stencils that had his initials, and he attached them to the peaches before they ripened, and then removed them after they had ripened, and put one of these signed peaches in each basket. And this is obviously a parable about photography, and he calls it a most ingenious manipulation of the sun. So Bayard was very aware of the fact that his intelligence, aesthetic intelligence, was not the only one. He was also extraordinarily aware of the fact that the photographic image, in order to be a picture, had to get up onto the wall, that it had to be framed. So here you see the difference between an Anna Atkins, one of her beautiful British and foreign ferns, and Bayard's iteration of a similar kind of thing. You see how compositional his is, that everything is organized towards the center. Even there you can see some sense that photographic space and painterly space are very different, that if you were to put a photograph on a wall that did not understand that photographic space is continuous, that you basically have extracted images out of a flow, the camera obscura's flow, and that unless you arbitrarily and absolutely frame it, cut off the space, it will not really be present on the wall. It won't be present in that moment or place. In order to pictorialize it, you have to do that. And everyone I'm going to talk about did, but he did it in the year that photography began. He did it in that year, and he did something that nobody was able to do for almost 20 years later. Again, in 1839, he got 32 of his pictures in a large frame, hung in an exhibition next to old master paintings. We have 2 reviews of them. He stole the show. And so it's just, there's nothing about him that could explain this mysterious combination of talents and understandings. At any rate, he made many self-portraits. He also understood that was an important form for establishing yourself as an author. But they're very curious because he always used these statuettes, and often he's in semi-masquerade himself. And there is this very easy slipping and sliding across the subject-object binary with him, all of which makes the fact that he staged the first death of the author, and that what he staged the death of was the theological author, really yet more extraordinary. So here we have it, Le Noyer, in 3 iterations. And he has a very witty note on the back, a suicide note, in which he talks about, he addresses the reader of the note as if the reader were a viewer of his work in 3 different venues: a morgue, a lecture hall, and an exhibition hall. And so again, just an uncanny sense of the importance of venue when it comes to the picture. Between 1848 and 1910, a number of other photographers also began making photographic pictures, sometimes by photographing prearranged tableaux, and at other times through combination printing or transformative interventions during the liquid stages of the process. And this is where I'm underrepresenting my talk. The most important, Gustave Le Gray, Oscar Gustav Rehlander, H.P. Robinson, Julia Margaret Cameron, and Edward Steichen, had conflicting ideas about how such a picture should look and how it should be made, and most of them didn't know each other, and they had no sense that they were engaged in a common project. But they all thought that a pictorial photograph was a signed and spatially delimited image that was exhibited on the walls of a museum or a gallery. And they also turned for inspiration to what Jeff Wall would call the Western picture. And most of the painters to whom they turned, or the three most important, are all master painters whose use of perspective, who are celebrated for their use of perspective. So Raphael's School of Athens, Dürer's 1500 self-portrait, and Velázquez's Las Meninas. Since all three painters are associated with perspective, one would expect the principles championed by Alberti in his landmark book to be highly visible. Mathematically determined orthogonals that negate the material support of the image and replace it with what appears to be an open window through which we view a composed, circumscribed, and apparently three-dimensional world unified around a centric or vanishing point. And we don't have any of those things. So as you will see from the Bayard, the image is incredibly close to the picture plane. There's virtually no room space. This is partly because he used paper as a receptive surface for his direct negatives, which draws the image to the surface, but it is also because of the way he stages the pictures. Although there is three-dimensional space in Le Gray's photographs, and I had a whole bunch in one of the many slideshows, but at any rate, I would like to say they will materialize in the fullness of time, but I know that they won't. In our time, in our special time, they will not materialize, but you will all go home and look at them if you haven't seen them before. You probably have seen his fabulous seascapes, which are combination prints and are put together. The sky comes from one negative and the sea from the other because of the different exposure times, and his waves are mobilizing this forward movement instead of the recessional movement. I mean, there is recession in his work, but there is a counter movement, a kind of propulsive movement towards us. So rolling waves create a strong forward movement in some of them, and since each wave is the luminous precipitate, not just of one, but many waves because of the length of the exposure, there is an alchemical translation of succession into simultaneity, so they are surprisingly thick. Since the seascapes stitch together the sky from one negative with the sea from another, the verticality of their combinatorial relationship also sometimes prevails over the recessional logic that is operative in each half. And I just want to say, in case I forget to say it later, that everything that is happening in Manet in the 1860s is happening in this work in, again, an incredibly mysterious way. Morselization, there's no unity, all of this weird space stuff, the increasing shallowness, the pushing of the figure forward, and so forth and so on. The space in many of Robinson's work is also extremely shallow, so much that his figures can be seen for what they are, two-dimensional cutouts. He is cutting figures out of many negatives and combining them. As we can see from the slide on the screen, which documents the process of bringing home the May, he not only isolated the figures from their surroundings when printing the negatives from which they derived, but also masked out the spaces into which he planned to insert them when printing the larger scene. And as you can also see, there is nothing seamless about the resulting joins. The space in Raylander's most famous picture is also shallow and at times flat. This is extremely surprising because the fresco on which it is based, School of Athens, is a celebrated example of one-point perspective, and consequently both a unified picture and one in which space extends to infinity. Raylander obviously knew this and must also have been able to see it because he was a painter before he became a photographer, but he eliminates the architectural cues through which Raphael, as one Raphael scholar puts it, hollowed out an illusion of three-dimensional space, close quotes, and that drew our eyes to the vanishing point. I wish that I had more Cameron. She's one of the heroines of my talk, but this will have to stand for it. However, it is her most wonderful. Cameron pushed the processes begun by Bayard, Legray, and Raylander much farther. Although she used collodion wet plate rather than paper photography, she did so in ways that resulted in a lot of the collateral damage that paper photography often involved, because she only had to work with very complicated and messy chemicals and had 10 minutes to do the following: dip her glass negatives in several chemical baths, insert the negative into the camera, expose it, focus it, expose it, remove it, and develop it. 10 minutes. So because, of course, it's also glass, the chemicals remain on the surface of it, and as Sally Mann, who works with this same process, has demonstrated brilliantly, it's skin-like, and it actually has the thinness. It gives you an image that's only skin deep and that can peel away like actual skin. She also framed her sitters so tightly that there seems that they are pushed right up against the picture plane, and just as Manet does in work of that same period, pushing the figure way up, a very flat picture, but then extreme plasticity of features, which she achieves through lighting. But there is a kind of sense that something is moving towards us, some aesthetic intelligence, some kind of agency, and of course the artists from this period, the photographers, also talk about the intelligence of paper photography, the intelligence of their lenses. She talks at great length about that. There's no discomfort about the idea that it's not just animals or animate things in which they would be locating this aesthetic intelligence and intentionality, but just as Hannah Arendt does in Man-Made Dead, artificial things, etc. And so sooner or later, they all, just like Bayard, realized, acknowledged, happily or unhappily, that there was this other agency within their work, that theirs was not the only one. And someone who visited Gustave Le Gray's studio and came out so admiring of the inclusiveness of it, was talking about Gustave Le Gray's famous for the theory of sacrifice, but he couldn't sacrifice anything, and so all the little bits and pieces of things that turned out well have been preserved, and they're painting and photography cohabiting. And he says, you know, it was a temple in which the intelligence of painting and photography could cohabit, and that kind of intelligent cohabitation or cohabitation of many intelligences is incredibly important and exciting part of this. So, what am I talking about here? What Leonardo talked about, what Algarotti, what Bayard, it's the same principle, and it serves no biological function, generates no meaning, and has no higher authorization. It is the formal pattern or design through which an object presents itself, the composition that it might be said to perform, and I'm quoting from some of the other people who've written about it, for the beholding eye of the viewer who, as Hannah Arendt puts it, is presupposed by its pattern or form. It can perhaps best be described as the way a body stylizes its being, the formalizations through which it presents itself to us. It is what inspired Eugène Delacroix to call the human body an admirable poem, the Austrian ethnologist Adolf Portman to characterize the animal patterns and shapes to which he devoted an entire book, the, quote, performance of a composition, close quote. The French surrealist writer Roger Caillois to say that there must be, quote, an autonomous aesthetic force in the world of biology, close quote. What motivated the American photographer Edward Steichen to curate an exhibition of delphiniums at MoMA in the 1930s, and what impelled me to devote a chapter of World Spectators to what I called the language of things. It also informs every aspect of Abby Warburg's historiography, and it inspired the German sculptor and photographer Karl Blossfeldt to describe a plant as an architectural structure that has been shaped and designed ornamentally and objectively, and deposit these structures as the source of human art making, to argue, quote, that the fluttering delicacy of a Rococo ornament, the heroic severity of a Renaissance candelabra, the mystically entangled tendrils of the Gothic flamboyant style, and the shapes of wrought iron railings all, quote, trace their original design back to the plant world, close quote. But James Agee is the most inspired exegete, that's a quote, inspired exegete from Merleau-Ponty, of the aesthetic intelligence of things. If I had to base this claim on only one of the scores of passages devoted to houses, domestic objects, and clothing in his and Walker Evans' book, Let Us Now Praise Famous Men, it would be his extended meditation on the 3 pairs of overalls in which George Gudger lives and works. Quote, the cloth sleeps against all salience of the body in complete peace, Agee declares of the oldest pair, and in its loose hangings from the knee downward is fallen and wandered in the first full loss of form into foldings I believe no sculptor has ever touched. The blue is so vastly fainted and withdrawn, it is discernible scarcely more as blue than as the most pacific silver, which the bone wood of the houses and the visage of genius seems to shed. And it is a color and cloth seeming ancient, veteran, composed, and patient to the source of being, as to the sleepings and the drift of form. Close quote. Hard to come back to my prose after that. Most of these writers and artists would never have noticed the world's patterns, poems, and compositions if it were not for the intentionality that propels them towards us, freights them with a sense of urgency, and often touches an answering chord in us. As I wrote in World Spectators, quote, "The world aspires or moves towards appearance," close quote, and since it can't appear without our look, it also intends to be seen by us. We associate intentionality with purposefulness, forethought, and determination, qualities that would seem to require not only a mind, but a will, so we believe it to be an exclusively human attribute. Indeed, it often seems to be humanity's most defining attribute, the one that makes us what we are. The intentionality through which the world moves towards appearance is, however, the opposite of this. Like the intelligence that I've just described and with which it is closely linked, it is objective rather than subjective and physical rather than mental. And although it cannot be consciously mobilized, its power is considerably greater than the one to which we attribute our agency, enough to override the conscious decisions of a photographer. And I'm not going to read this because I'm missing the images that would make sense of it, but Blossfeld, the one who was talking about plant forms being the source of human art, he photographed in a very Jugendstil style. The plants themselves look Jugendstil. It's very bizarre. He made these photographs that kind of anticipate the Beckers in a certain way without any intention that they be art, that they be seen as art. They were just an archive for his students, for him to use in his sculpture classes. But when he published them as a book, a kind of archival book, they were hailed as pictorial photographs themselves, as if the plants, in order to overcome the archival abyss into which they were likely to be, headed otherwise, had authored them from the inside, had extended their aesthetic qualities outwards. It's very mysterious looking at them. And Walter Benjamin talks about Blossfeld, and now we are turning to a very kind of, it's going to be the last move of the argument, but it's a really important one, and so I'm just going to stop for a minute because there may be some rough transitions here. So I wrote this book called World Spectators, and it was all about our look and the world intending to be seen by us. But as I was working on this, I was so struck that Hannah Arendt always talks about everything that is presupposed, is meant to be seen. It's always to be seen, to be seen, to be seen. It's visibility, not vision, visibility, not vision. And that is, of course, what Leonardo is. It's the hyperbolization of vision, and the location of Alberti's eye, or Leonardo's eye, outside the picture. It's vision, which is theologically being theologically articulated, and visibility, which is being renounced. So I thought, wow, that's strange. I'm not going to reread the Bible myself, but I'm sure that one of those at Google could be really handy here. And I'm sure that there have been compilations on the part of devout evangelical Christians of God's look. And, so of course it's always the same. God is invisible. You cannot see him. You will die if you see him. However, he sees everything. We are utterly exposed. We are pinned to like a butterfly to velvet by his look. So, there we go. And that is really, again, kind of almost too good or too bad to be true. So I have been haunted by these lines, by Merleau-Ponty, which no matter how many times I read them, send a kind of shock through my system, but that are also so overwhelmingly moving. So he says, even as soon as I see, I must experience myself as seen by another from a place in the middle of the world, among other things, as one of the translator puts it brilliantly, as one of the visibles. And then in another passage, he in effect says, I am a thing. That's the word that sends the tremor through me. I'm a thing like other things, among other things. I'm a thing like other things and among other things, as well as the eye that sees them or the hand that touches them. So yeah, that was a kind of reckoning with my own environment in the paradigm that I am so critical of. I mean, realizing how deeply this goes. And the part of the argument that I won't be able to present today, but that is very important here, is that the chiasm, which I've actually may have my own diagram of here. No? Okay. Well, at any rate, I will send it. I will send it, and it can be sent to everyone. So yes, the negative-positive relationship had always seemed to me to be very closely related to the chiasm, and I had always thought about it as reversibility. But then I realized, as I was working with this passage from Leonardo, that there's a side-by-side relationship so you put a negative beside a positive, and if you do that with Fox Talbot's, you have a sense of the two-sidedness of the subject-object, the two-sidedness of us, but also you realize that you could flip them over and they would be superimposed face to face. In other words, that there are three aspects of the negative that are chiasmatic and that are part of photography's disclosure to us of what we have repudiated by slicing the chiasm into a subject-object binary. We are beside ourselves, we don't coincide with ourselves, and because of that, we are in a facing relationship to the other. My non-coincidence puts me in a relationship with the other. And so when Merleau-Ponty says, I'm a thing like other things in the world, he says, and our double belonging to the order of the object and the order of the subject reveals unexpected relations between us and the other, which again is incredibly important. So now what we're going to be, the last little bit, and I may just stop at a certain point because I was slow in getting started. It's the coming together of these two principles, one of which is social, the beholder and the sitter in relation to the author, and the kind of challenge they pose to his autonomy, which leads Dürer in his last self-portrait to try to cram them all in, which Joseph Kerner has read so brilliantly. The theological author as like the Trinity, it's, he's trying to be one person, even though he's three. So this social challenge, and then this other one that comes from the world of objects, they're going to converge in the figure of the sitter, and that's the part I'm going to read now. Because the operator played such a negligible role in their production, many early photographs have only one kind of intelligence, the objective intelligence of the thing or body that traced its image on a receptive surface. Subjective intelligence is therefore on the human side, the observer's side, and objective intelligence on the other. A pictorial photograph, though, of the sort that I'm dealing with in this book, the 19th century one, is bringing those two together. And when we split ourselves into a subject and object, we bifurcated, we separated those intelligences, and this photographic picture is bringing them together. So it's weird, of course, for a photographer to be facing an object, a non-human body, and feel that there's some intentionality coming from it. But it's much harder when it's from the sitter, and we have this whole crisis of the artists, both painters and photographers, around the sitter, especially with Robinson. It's just smash them into the background, flatten out the picture, make them part of the ornamentation. Almost every one of the many books he wrote has a chapter called Managing the Sitter. There's always a sense that the sitter is stealing your authorial fire somehow. And so, of course, there's this idea that the intention that is getting in the way of his is a subjective one. It's coming from the personhood, from the psyche of the sitter. But of course, if we think back to the passage in Little History of Photography where Benjamin discusses the two photographs, it's a bodily intelligence and intentionality, and it's very powerful. So here's this last little bit. The photograph in which the paragraph in which Benjamin introduces the optical unconscious contains his discussions of Hill and Adamson's photograph of Mrs. Elizabeth Johnstone Hall and Carl Dothenday's betrothal photograph. And although he doesn't mention Blossfeldt in either of them, he's the one who did the plant photographs. He is clearly thinking about him here because in both cases he focuses on what he calls an intention that goes beyond testimony to the photographer's art, i.e. that contravenes his intentions. In both cases, Benjamin associates it with the woman at the center of the photograph, and he tells us through 4 lines from a Stefan Georg poem that in the case of Elizabeth Johnstone Hall, it was from her body that it was issuing. And so we are now dealing with this very mysterious thing, which led me to realize that not only are we a thing in the world like other things, but we also have an intelligence. Our body is also turned away from us. It turns a face to the world that we cannot see, just as Benjamin talks about nature shows another, different features to the world and to the human eye. It opens itself differently to the camera. That this, and most extraordinarily, I think of everything I have to say, I now am beginning to think is true of us, so that no matter how much we might renounce our body, renounce ourselves as objects, that process will continue, and it means that we are always addressing the other and intending towards a look that only the other can provide. A little bit of Robinson. I'm just starting in medias res because I have a very, very lengthy discussion of his irritation towards the sitters. Since it seemed impossible for him to avoid his sitters' objective intelligence as long as he was making portraits of them, he began using trained models and positioning them within fictive tableaux. Most of these tableaux contain at least one figure who is dressed in the clothing of a field worker but portrayed by someone else. Well, so I guess I'll just go back to that. He would actually buy clothes that he would use for his photo sessions from people who are walking down the street, people of the lower classes. So most of these tableaux contain at least one figure who is dressed in the clothing of an actual field worker, but portrayed by someone else, usually of a higher social rank. He defends this practice at great length against the criticism that it is artificial and or socio-economically inappropriate, but compounds both offenses with every self-extenuating word. A photographer has ideas of his own, Robinson writes, so he needs obedience in his models, since it's, quote, I can barely say this, since it's hard, quote, to explain what you want to a fresh-caught peasant, close quote, he is obliged to work with models from the higher classes. This doesn't mean, though, that his pictures are artificial. His models are, quote, so near the real, close quote, that they are, quote, taken for it by the real natives, just as the trout doesn't seem to know the difference between the natural and artificial fly, close quote. But during one of these absurd disquisitions, he says something extremely revealing. He says that the aboriginal is, quote, seldom sufficiently intelligent to be of use to a photographer who has intention in his work. By pitting authorial intention against rural workers and referring to them as aboriginals, he divulges his real reason for this system. If he had photographed a field worker in her own clothing, the resulting picture would have resulted from the original, just as a portrait does from the sitter, and he would have been back to square one. So he decided, so what we have now is this picture, which is called Fading Away, and which is very famous, one of his most famous. And this picture, which is very beautiful and is very mysterious. And so I'm just going to read that and then we'll end. So he describes his process of combination printing this way. In the figure negative, everything should be stopped out with the exception of the figure with black varnish. Then cut out the figure and lay it face down on the landscape negative in the position you wish it to occupy in the finished print. It may be fixed in its position by gumming the corners near the lower edge of the plate. It is now ready for printing. But Robinson does not appear to have followed this process through to completion with at least one picture. She Never Told Her Love, which he intended as a study for Fading Away. Fading Away is a combination print. As you can see, it screams combination print, and it was presumably made in the way that he just described. She Never Told Her Love is also sometimes called a combination print, and it apparently started out as one because everything but the figure seems to have been, quote, stopped out with black varnish. But instead of then cutting the figure out of the negative, laying it face down in its intended position on another negative, gluing it in place, printing it, and treating it as a study, he printed the negative, titled the print, and exhibited it as his photograph. In so doing, he inadvertently acknowledged that an image that was not governed at every moment in its construction by the conscious intentions of its author could be a work of art. And he was right to do so because She Never Told Her Love is a lovely picture. Floating in a sea of darkness without any support but her bed, the girl at its diagonal center is, as Heidegger would say, held out into the nothing. The cascade of classically draped sheets covering the lower part of her body is already immersed in the black waters and has begun to assume its color, and the frail craft with its precious cargo will soon suffer a similar fate. But everything about the girl's luminous torso and face is at this crucial moment, quote, formed with a view to visibility, close quote. Quote from Hannah Arendt. The fall of her hair, the angle of her backrest that allows her to settle into it, and the intimate relationship between her body and the pillows. And unlike the elements of Fading Away that were so coercively conjoined that they seem on the verge of breaking apart, those in She Never Told Her Love belong together. The whiteness of the figure calls for the blackness of the surrounding field, just as the positive does for the negative, or Legre's skies for his seas. As we can see from her relaxed pose, the model is at home in this picture, and this makes sense because she is also clearly its source. What can't be so easily explained, though, is how this could have happened. What allowed her aesthetic intelligence to eclipse his in a photograph that he made. I say that he made because She Never Told Her Love isn't a portrait and therefore a picture into which the sitter could have grown in some other way, like the ones described by Benjamin. She is playing a fictional character. However, Robinson seems to have recognized her aesthetic intelligence as the source of all the details that I just mentioned, because he changes every one of them in Fading Away. He replaces the cascade of classically draped sheets with conventionally folded linen, conceals the model's hand by swaddling her up to the neckline, alters the tilt of her head so that we no longer see her face, and adjusts the angle of the backrest so that her back is uncomfortably rigid. He makes fading away a rectangle instead of a square and rationalizes the abstract but emotionally charged blackness of the earlier work by filling every inch of the picture with representational bric-a-brac. But this attempted exorcism had no effect on She Never Told Her Love. All that Robinson had to show at the end of it was a much less compelling picture. He was apparently still thinking about it 40 years later, because in 1896 he proclaimed them both to be the works that he had always intended them to be. She Never Told Her Love was really done for purposes of study and may be called one, he writes in the Elements of a Pictorial Photograph. It afterward developed into a large picture known as Fading Away, which shows that the design of a photographer can grow. Even after all these years, though, he does not dare to take the next step to declare himself the author of the earlier work. Okay, I'm going to stop there. Yeah, of course, of course.
Okay, so thank you so much. We have time for a couple of questions. We have standing mics on either side. If anyone wants to ask, it is late, but please, if you could keep your remarks, your questions short, so that as many people can speak as possible.
Or if as many people don't want to speak as possible,
that works too.
Keep them along.
So, are there any questions? There are standing mics in the aisles. If anyone has any questions?
It's a little challenging, I think.
It is.
Yeah.
It is challenging.
Yeah, so is there anything I can do to help? Explanations, summaries, clarifications? I guess it was just
It was perfect.
perfectly lucid.
So, well, then I want to just, again, on behalf,
Oh,
yes, you do, wonderful.
Much of your discussion reminded me of, I'm sure you saw Rilke's poem, the heroic torso of Apollo.
Oh, yeah.
There's no point on it which does not see you.
Yeah.
But then, of course, you showed
Yeah, the microphone's right over there.
it was fun talking while I was walking.
I know.
Felt like I was making it.
Yeah.
So there's the famous poem that I'm sure you thought about in this context by Rilke, the heroic torso of Apollo, where near the end he says that there's no point on the observation of the speaking poet / observer is so so powerful and so detailed that the achievement of it is that there's no point of the sculpture which does not see him.
Yeah.
So the result of his assiduous observing is not that he sees it completely, but that he is completely seen. Okay, so that goes along with much of what you mentioned. But then there's the killer line at the end, you must change your life. Yeah. Okay, so I was just wondering that next leap to the to self-transformation, which I think is beyond the type of dichotomies that you presented in the talk. If you have something to say about that.
Yes, Rilke's a very central figure in Flesh of My Flesh, which is the book that I ended up writing after World Spectators, and there's a tremendous amount of this stuff in it. I mean, the Duino elegies, the sonnets to Orpheus, it's there all the way through, and it's also, of course, in Proust. I mean, every modernist writer you would really, I mean, it's there in Barthes' Camera Lucida. It's all over the place, really. I think that it's easier, though. It was easier for Rilke to experience that in relation to an object than it was a subject. You know, that's of course something that I am really intent on dealing with, the face that we turn to the other and that we cannot see ourselves and our imbrication within the other. You know, Rilke lived, of course, in Muso in absolute solitude for a very long period of time at the end of his life, and told Lou Andres Salome that even a dog would be too much relationality for him. And of course, Proust. So it's these male solitaries who are extraordinarily sensitive to that in objects and incredibly shut off from that in subjects. I mean, from the way two is the smallest unit of being. I mean, they would say, yes, two is the smallest unit of the torso, the statue's being, but one is the smallest unit of mind. Right? Okay. Yeah, the turning, yeah. Yeah. Okay, yeah, okay, I know, yeah. Yeah. So absolutely. I mean, this is just huge and sprawling. So it's been very, very hard to extract things from. This is my third attempt to do that. And although the chaos of all of this might suggest otherwise, the most successful, I think. So the way I start is with James Agee, who's another figure who is so alive to the aesthetic intelligence and intentionality of the world in all forms, also human beings, but is never able, he says, and so would I tell you in all fullness and leisures of what I am and what I perceive. He's an anti-Cartesian. He knows that you've got to open your eyes and your ears, and that that's part of changing your life, but it never occurs to him that he's one of the visibles. Never. So this country letter begins with this searing passage that seems to be him looking at lonely people in what he calls Golden Aquarium, in lighted windows who are, as he puts it, none can care beyond this room or be cared for beyond this room. And then you realize, oh my God, he's sitting facing the wall on the other side of which the tenant farmers whom he has come to write about are sleeping. We've got a wall, we've got a subject-object wall, and he's wrestling with himself, reckoning with himself if he can even care that far. I mean, there's some incredibly hard soul searching going on, and so, you know, that's really where I start. How do we? Some of us live in bigger rooms than others, but you know, the limits of our capacity to care are extraordinarily constricted. I listen to, you listen to NPR over the course of the day, and how many times do you let yourself care? I mean, how many you say to yourself, I'm just going to be ravaged, I'm just going to be, I can't. We all are saying a lot of that right now because the world is so dark. It's so dark. But yeah, we must change our lives in the sense of revisiting the division that we subject. So, okay, oh boy, we're off the great chain of being. Men, women, isn't that great? 2 months later, it's awfully crowded here. Do we have to have all these men and women? How about only artists? Let's have only artists, that is, great for a while, and then Leonardo says, only the painter, only the painter, only the painter, and Sir Philip Sidney says, only the poet, and then it doesn't stop until it's only me, until I'm the only one, but then I'm not, in fact, one, because I don't coincide with myself. So I'm the only one, but am I only one? And then I think in order to attempt to become that one, the cleavage, the subject-object cleavage that leaves us without the capacity to care beyond the room, I think that blow falls upon us, and yeah, that's what we've been living with ever since.
I think we have another.
Oh, yeah. Where?
Right here.
On the other microphone.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Wait.
There's been an emerging concept for a while that's been referred to as visual literacy. And I'm just getting back to it after many years. But I was wondering how you would compare the relationship, this is a very, very basic question, between an image and a word. How would they relate together? How do they differ? But I'm just curious, from your experience point of view, like how you would think about that.
Wow. Well, I think I've written a great deal about it, which is part of what makes it hard for me to answer, because in the process of thinking about it, my answers got very, very complicated, and I can't think of a single one that would be adequate. But I think that words can behave like pictures, and pictures like words. So here's the thing that. So this, by the way, is the sublime Edward Steichen, and it's from 1899. This is not unrelated, although maybe not directly related to your question. And photography's been industrialized, and so the whole question of photography is art. It's like you've got to start all over again. But he's also a curator, and he has grasped the central importance of what I call the there, the space that he's standing in, which is the space into which the kind of picture I'm talking about extends partly, that allows for a crossover, a kind of encounter of beholder and sitter. And it's as if he is now explaining this whole thing that has just happened to us. It's so extraordinarily brilliant. So the picture's too small to be on the wall. It's placed in the wrong position. It hasn't. Nothing has been thought through, and really the establishment of this place was very long in the making. So he's standing there, and he's looking at us, but that little picture that is empty is also the mirror in Las Meninas. Oh, and this is another self-portrait in which she's occupying that same place, but now as a viewer, and you see the picture is too low. So you see that also he is revisiting the two-sided, three-person picture, or the prototype for that. I think Las Meninas is the prototype for the kind of photograph I'm interested in. And he is, in effect, answering the debate about the mirror and the king and queen. I mean, who's on the other side? We are. I mean, there's no permanent image in there. It's whoever stands in front of it. So he was ridiculed for being only half of an author. The reviewer said the other half of him must be at the neighbor's house because his street number was 33 and a half. He puts Velázquez, who is importantly only able to look, he can't paint at the same time. The gap is very important, together with Durer, who's the transubstantialization of his picture, and then Hollandaise cloak he wears, so who did these hilarious images of himself as Christ, queer images of himself as Christ on the cross. So anyway, Steichen, now I'm coming back to the question of the person who was standing there for so long, was the last of the great pictorialists and the one, and the place where the picture achieves itself in the fullest sense. But then pictorialism passes it passes out of fashion, and that goes on for a very long time. And Roy de Carava, it goes to Harlem, which I think is wonderful. It goes to Harlem and it stays in Harlem for a long time. And during that time, James Agee goes to, with Walker Evans, whom he deliberately chooses because he's not a pictorialist, but the pictorial principle surfaces in Agee's prose that is the response for which the things in his environment call. In other words, he lets us see them. And so that's my answer to the question. I think pictures can also behave like words, but I'm not going to try to answer that.
You've been standing there for a while. What's your question?
Well, I sort of maybe partly answered, but I was thinking about the tradition of ekphrastic poetry and about you were talking about the idea of how photographs separate people from themselves, and then you see the image of yourself, and in a way does the idea of photographs make people capable of having an ekphrastic ability to look at themselves in an ekphrastic way?
Well, so I think that what you're seeing is some rendition of that face that you're turning towards the other. That's why we often don't like it at all. And it's, when you think about it, the sitter's body is holding the pencil of light with which the image is being drawn. It's got a kind of, there is a physical principle as well as an ontological. I'm resistant to the idea that we can get ourselves around that. I don't know if you're even suggesting that, but I wouldn't want to say, oh, good, then I can make it mine and I can be on both sides, if you know what I mean. Because then we're back to the individual or the theological author. But I think that ekphrastic poetry or Agee's prose is to the nth degree, and that someone could do that in language is, I mean, I think that that it's sublime writing, that it's just sublime writing. But so at any rate, the pictorial is at the heart of the world. It's not something that we bring to it. It speaks to us in pictures. It's calling upon us to see it as a picture. All of these things that we are used to seeing as artificial, anthropomorphic, etc. In effect, I'm suggesting there's some radical misunderstanding of this principle, and I find this exciting. Hopefully, you do too.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's give a warm thank you to Kaja Silverman once again. Thank you so much. And thank you all for coming. Good night. Thank you so much. This is wonderful.
Yeah, I was happy.